Chapter 2 of In the Field, 1914-1915. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by FNH. In the Field, 1914-1915, by Marcel Dupont. Chapter 2. The First Charge. September 4. 6 o'clock in the evening. The atmosphere was heavy and stifling. The regiment had been formed into two columns, to the right and to the left of the high road from Vauchamps to Montmirail. The men, tired out, their faces black with dust, had hardly dismounted when they threw themselves on the ground and slept in a field of cut corn. The officers chatted together in groups to keep themselves awake. Nights are short when you are on campaign. The bivouac was pitched at midnight and was to be struck at 3 o'clock in the morning. And since 6 o'clock the battle had been raging, for the enemy had engaged our rear guard almost immediately. This had happened each day of that regrettable retreat, begun at the Sambre and pushed on to the Marne. Each day we had had to fight. Each day the enemy was repulsed. Each day we were obliged to retire. Brother soldiers, you who came through those painful hours, shall you ever forget them? Shall you ever forget the anguish that wrung our hearts when, as the sun was sinking, you, who had seen so many of your comrades fall, had to give up further portion of our sweet France, to deliver up some of our lovely hamlets, some of our fields, our orchards, our gardens, some of our vineyards to these barbarians? You were ordered to do so. We have learnt since then how important such sacrifices were, but at the time we did not know, and doubt came into our minds. We passed through cruel days, and nothing will ever efface the impression of physical and moral prostration that came over us. The regiment was sleeping, tired out. Alone, calm, phlegmatic, the Colonel kept watch, standing in the middle of the road, with his pipe between his teeth, beneath his ruddy drooping moustache, his cap pulled down over his eyes, his arms crossed on the light blue tunic. He seemed to be ever watchful shepherd of that immense flock. At such moments the chief must be able to seem unconscious of the self-abandonment, the disorder and the exhaustion of his men. Human powers have their limits. They had been expended for days without stint. Every moment of cessation from actual fighting had to be a moment of repose. The important thing is that the chief should keep watch. Brave little chasseurs, sleep in peace. Your Colonel is watching over you. I looked at the men of my troop, on the ground in front of their horses. How could I recognise the smart, brilliant accoutred horsemen, whose uniforms used to make such a gay note in the old-fashioned streets of the little garrison town? Under the battered shakoes with their shapeless peaks, the tanned, emaciated faces looked like masks of wax. Youthful faces had been invaded with beards which made them look like men of 30 or more. The dust of roads and fields raised by horses, waggons and limbers had settled on them, showing up their wrinkles and getting into eyes, noses and moustaches. Their clothes, patched as chance allowed during a halt under some hedge, were enamels of many coloured pieces. A few more days with such unremitting war, and we should have vied with the glorious tatterdemalions of the army of Italy and the Sambre at Meuse, as Raffet paints them. With their noses in the air, their mouths open, their eyes half shut, my chasseurs lay stretched out among the legs of their horses and slept heavily. Poor horses! Poor pretty creatures, so delicate, so fiery in their glossy summer coats. They had followed their masters' fortunes. How many of them had already fallen under the Prussian bullets! How many had been left dying of exhaustion or starvation after the terrible rides! They seemed to sleep, absorbed in some miserable dream of nothing but burdens to carry, blows to bear and wounds to suffer. They were hanging their heads, but had not even the strength to crop the green blades growing here and there amongst the stalks of corn. I felt uneasy, wondering whether they would still be equal to an effort for the fight that was always likely and always desired. Suddenly, from the ridge some 800 yards behind us, coming down like a bolt, I saw a horse at full gallop. Its rider was gesticulating wildly. Strange to say, though, not a word had been said. As though awakened by an electric current, every man had got up and had fixed his astonished eyes on the newcomer. He was an artillery non-commissioned officer. His face was crimson, his hair unkempt. His cap had come off his head and was dangling by the chin-strap. With a violent jerk he pulled up his foaming horse. For a second: "Where is the Colonel? The Colonel?" With one voice the whole squadron replied: "There on the road. What's the matter?" He had already set off again at full speed, had reached the Colonel, and was bending down towards him. Even at that distance we could hear some of his words: "Uhlans, near the woods, our guns, our teams." Then it was like a miracle. Without any word of command, without any sign, in a moment the whole regiment was on horseback, sword in hand. The Colonel alone had remained standing. With the greatest calmness he asked the sergeant in an undertone for some information, and the man answered with emphatic gestures. All eyes were fixed upon the group. Everybody waited breathlessly for the order which was going to be given and repeated by 500 voices, by 500 men drunk with joy. We believed the glorious hour was at last come, which we had been awaiting with so much impatience since the opening of the campaign. The charge! That indescribable thing which is the raison d'être of the trooper, that sublime act which pierces, rends and crushes by a furious onslaught, wild gallop with the uplifted sword, yelling mouth and frenzied eyes. The charge! The charge of our great ancestors, of those demigods, Murat, Lasalle, Curly, Kellermann and so many others. The charge we had been asking for with all our hearts ever since the opening of the campaign, and which had always been denied us. Ah, that famous German cavalry, that set up its doctrine of pushing the attack to the death. What hatred and what contempt we had conceived for them! We had one desire, and only one: to measure ourselves with them. And every time we had seen their squadrons, the result had been either that they had turned and retired in good order behind their lines of infantry, or they had drawn us into some ambuscade under the pitiless fire of their deadly machine guns. Were we at last to meet them and measure our swords with their lances? The regiment moved off in one body behind the Colonel, who was riding a big chestnut horse, as calm as at manoeuvres, led us at a gentle trot, skirting little clumps of trees that dotted the plain. A troop had gone forward in a halo of glittering dust to act as an advance guard. Our horses seemed to have understood what we were about. Or was it we who had passed on to them the fighting spirit that fired us? I felt behind me the thrill that ran through my men. The first rank could not manage to keep the correct distance, the yard and a half which ought to separate it from its leader. Even the corporal in the centre allowed his horse to graze the haunches of mine. Tourne Toujours, my gallant charger, the fiery thoroughbred which had so often maddened me at riding schools of the regiment and at manoeuvres, by his savageness and the shaking he gave me. Tourne Toujours gave evident signs of excitement by his pawing the ground every now and then. He, an officer's horse, seemed to resent the close proximity of mere troop horses. And certainly, under ordinary circumstances, I should have fallen foul of the rider impudent enough to ride close to his heels. But on that occasion I merely laughed in my sleeve, knowing that in a few minutes, when the charge had begun, Tourne Toujours would soon have made them all keep their proper distance, and something more. I took a pleasure in looking at the faces of the men of the 3rd Squadron, whose troops were riding in column abreast of us. Their chins were raised, their eyes wide open, intent, under the shade of their cap peaks, upon the slightest irregularities of the ground ahead. Their hands grasped their sword hilts tightly. Major B, leaning well forward and riding between the 2 squadrons, was practising some furious cutting strokes. What a grand fight it was going to be! How we should rejoice to see the curved sabres of our comrades rising against the clear sky to slash down upon the leather schapskas of our foes! We waited for the word that was to let loose the pent-up energy of all those tense muscles. A trooper came back from the advance guard at full speed and brought up his horse with the spur beside the Colonel. He reported in short sentences, which we could not hear. The Colonel turned towards our captain, who was behind him, leaning forward over his horse, all attention, and with his sword lowered, receiving the orders given in an undertone. We only heard the last sentence: "I shall support you with the rest of the regiment." Thank Heaven, thought I, it is we, it is our dear squadron that is to have the honour of attacking first. Every man pulled himself together. Every man felt conscious of all the glory in store for us.